In 2011, Syria erupted into chaos. After the Assad regime responded immoderately to peaceful protests during the Arab Spring, killing hundreds and deploying authoritarian tactics in an attempt to quell any opposition, by 2012, the conflict developed into a full-blown civil war. The war only continued to escalate. Kurdish forces carved out a de facto mini-state in the north, and in 2014, the Islamic State emerged, seizing large amounts of territory and building what they call a caliphate. International actors served only to perpetuate the war, complicating the situation into a multifaceted, multi-party humanitarian disaster. Cities were destroyed, lives ruined. Death toll remains unknown. Communications from the United Nations simply cite hundreds of thousands killed. Altogether, the various elements of the conflict have joined together in perfect, devastating harmony, creating the largest humanitarian crisis of the 21st century. According to the International Rescue Committee, over 12 million people have been displaced, including the majority of the Syrian population. For me, this issue is personal. Over the past summer, I volunteered for the International Rescue Committee as a camp counselor, helping welcome newly arrived refugee children to the United States and provide their parents with childcare over the unoccupied summer months. I made friends with many refugees from all over the world. Some had fled ethnic cleansing in Bhutan and Myanmar, some fled the violence in the DRC, and many fled from the conflict in Syria. My friend Tarema was one of the more recent arrivals. Her family is from Iraq, a nation deeply impacted by the Syrian conflict and partially occupied by ISIS. That's her in the picture. The refugees I had the chance to meet were some of the most genuine, mature, and intelligent people I had ever gotten to know. That's why I was confused when I heard the calls to close the door to refugees and expel those already accepted. When they were called threats to national security, the American economy, and to American culture at large. Had these people ever met a refugee? What did they know that I didn't? How did they view the world in such a way? So today, for the sake of fairness, of truth, and of understanding, we are going to take an objective, ethical look at the question: does the acceptance of refugees expose the United States to any unwanted consequences? And, if so, should those risks affect American policy towards refugees? In order to answer this under the ethical system of utilitarianism, a system solely concerned with consequence and outcome, we are going to consider the economic, national security, and cultural consequences of refugee admittance. In doing so, we are going to analyze the common arguments and rhetoric associated with refugee admittance, and hopefully dispel any existing misconceptions or myths. Let's start with the money. What are the economic consequences of letting in refugees? According to a report by the Partnership for a New American Economy, a coalition of hundreds of business and political leaders, the effect is positive. Refugees are more likely to start their own businesses, doing so at a rate of 13% as opposed to around 9% for native-born citizens. After resettlement is complete, refugees also contribute disproportionately back to the government that assisted them, earning well above the national median household income and thus paying more in taxes. In 2015 alone, refugees contributed over $20 billion in federal and state taxes. Refugees also play an important role in an aging labor market. In 2015, 77% of the country's refugees were of working age, compared to less than half of the US-born population. This youthful disparity will only serve to be more important in the future as life expectancy increases and takes costs for programs such as Medicare and Social Security with it. In general, the report finds that refugees play an important economic role, and in the long run, their admittance is a net positive on the American economy. Another concern associated with the acceptance of refugees is the national security risk they pose. President Trump likened them to Trojan horses during his campaign, and many have expressed similar concerns about their arrival. According to an analysis published by the Cato Institute, a notably conservative institution, the fear of a terrorist threat through refugees is not only overblown, but completely baseless. The report analyzed all terrorist incidents since 1975 and found that events of refugee terrorism are exceedingly rare. That rarity can be accounted for by the rigor of the existing screening process. it is the hardest way to gain entry into the United States. A combination of 6 government agencies work to hand-select registered refugees by the United States, by the UN, and the process of refugee admittance regularly takes over 2 years. The vetting process is already extreme. Likewise present in Europe, the debate over the admittance of refugees has prompted a moral panic amongst many Americans. There is a fear of what Sasha Polkow-Stransky calls in her book, Go Back to Where You Came From, an immutable civilizational enemy. This fear is only compounded by the disproportionate reporting of terrorist incidents and the common representation of refugees as male, culturally unadaptable, and violent. The fear of a cultural takeover is not only logically ridiculous, but also a form of personally meditated racism, as defined by Camera Phyllis Jones. The differential assumptions about the abilities, motives, and the intentions of others according to their race, and thus differential actions toward others according to their race. Because they pray different, look different, and express themselves differently, refugees are the victim of prejudice. Refugees have not and will not destroy American culture, nor will they implement Sharia law. Even if the desire to do so is present, which it is not, the prospect of doing so is simply impossible. By giving into ignorance and fear, we not only deprive innocent people of safety, but we abandon the values of tolerance, liberty, and acceptance that made us the nation we are today. To determine the correct moral action under the system of utilitarianism, we must determine the utility of accepting refugees. That is to weigh the amount of good and the amount of bad the action produces, and to do so from the perspective of the disinterested and benevolent spectator, putting aside personal belief and affiliation. So, using the principle of utility, we can determine that the acceptance of refugees is a moral action. By accepting refugees, lives are directly saved, a tremendous good for a large number of people. Compounding this good is the economic impact of refugees, which, as a whole, benefits America and her citizens. Potential sources of bad, such as terrorism committed by refugees, are of such rare occurrence that they are negligible in the moral calculus. The calculations are undoubted. The ethical action, according to utilitarianism, is to accept refugees. I personally believe that accepting refugees is the moral action. I believe that the United States has a moral obligation as a member of the larger international community to aid and assist in addressing humanitarian crises, such as the one present. If we wish to maintain our exclusive geopolitical standing as a leader of the world, we need to lead. My beliefs are also strongly influenced by my personal relationship with a number of refugees. They are quality people, and I know that many more like them reside behind the wall of admittance. Many organizations do important work in aiding refugees, but in conclusion of this presentation, we will focus on only one, the International Rescue Committee. Founded in 1933, the organization responds to the world's greatest disasters and crises, helping those whose lives have been shattered by conflict survive, recover, and regain control over their lives. They work in 5 separate continents and on hundreds of separate issues. On the particular issue of American resettlement of refugees, their work is nothing short of miraculous. They completely facilitate the resettlement of refugees, helping them with everything from legal representation, vocational and educational training, and even to furnishing their home. Their work is without a doubt effective. In 2016 alone, they helped settle over 13,000 refugees in America. They also work politically and had a very key part in the response to President Trump's so-called Muslim ban. Thank you, and please consider supporting the IRC and similar organizations.